You know, pretty much everyone knows the story of Noah's Ark, right? There's this righteous guy, a gigantic boat, all the animals two by two, and a flood that washes the whole world clean. It's one of the most famous stories ever told. But what if there's a secret layer to it? What if we've been reading it just a little bit wrong? Let's peel back the layers and see what's really going on.
Seriously, what if it's not really about history or even just a record of some catastrophic weather event? What if instead it's something more profound, a carefully crafted divine message? What if it's an apocalypse, in the truest, original sense of that word?
So there's this fantastic biblical scholar, Milton Spenser, and his whole take on this is that the main point of the Noah story isn't just to tell us about a big flood. No, it's to reveal these deep, powerful truths about God's judgment, His grace, and how salvation works. The story itself is really just the vehicle for a much bigger message.
Now, I know when we hear the word apocalypse, our minds immediately jump to, the end of the world, fire and brimstone, the whole shebang. But the word's original meaning is actually an unveiling or a revelation. So the apocalypse of Noah isn't just about destruction. It's a story that's designed to unveil God's purpose. And that's the lens we're going to be using to look at this ancient story today.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at why this story is more than just history. Then we'll get into a really interesting so-called contradiction about judgment. We'll see the flood as the end of an entire age, how that led to a totally new world, and the new promise that came with it. And we're going to wrap it all up by decoding a pretty tricky prophecy at the very end.
Okay, first up, moving beyond a purely historical reading. The way Terry sees it, the person who wrote this down wasn't trying to be a modern historian, getting every single detail perfectly consistent. The goal was to weave everything together into one powerful narrative with a deep theological point.
And this is huge, because once you see it that way, a lot of the things that seem like contradictions in the text suddenly start to make a whole lot more sense. What looks like a mistake from one angle is actually there for a very specific, very important revelatory purpose.
Okay, check this out. First, God tells Noah, bring 2 of every kind. Simple enough. But then, a little later, right before the rain starts, the command changes. Now it's, take 7 pairs of the clean animals. So what's going on here? Is it a mistake? A contradiction? If you're reading this like a history book, it's a problem. But if you see it as an apocalypse, it's something totally different. And here's the brilliant part. It's not a contradiction. It's a developing revelation. Think about it like a vision that's coming into focus. The first command gives Noah the basic plan, save the species. But the second command, coming right before showtime, adds a new, crucial detail. You're going to need extra clean animals for sacrifices when this is all over. See? Later visions just add more information. They don't cancel out the old ones.
This idea of a developing plan leads us right to our next point, the end of an age. The flood wasn't just some random punishment. It was the consummation of an age. It essentially became the blueprint, the original template for every future moment of divine crisis, what the prophets later would call the great and terrible day of the Lord.
And you can see this idea echoed for centuries. Just look at this quote. Way later, the Apostle Peter uses the flood as a direct parallel, a direct foreshadowing of a future judgment by fire. The pattern was set right there with Noah. A corrupt, unbelieving world gets caught totally off guard, a massive judgment comes, and one age ends to make way for a new one.
And of course, with the end of that old, corrupt world came the dawn of a brand new one. Noah and his family, they were the remnant, the ones who were saved to kickstart this new age. And this new age came with a whole new set of operating instructions for humanity. And these were the ground rules for the new era. It's almost like a reboot of the creation story. You've got the command to multiply, a new rule about what humans can eat, but also these really important new sacred laws. Respect the life within the blood, and above all, recognize that human life is sacred because we are all made in God's image. This was literally the blueprint for a higher, more ordered civilization.
And this whole new world was built on the foundation of a new promise, a formal covenant, an agreement between God and all of humanity, for all time. And like any great treaty, this one was sealed with an absolutely beautiful and powerful symbol, a sign right there in the clouds.
Now get this, the contrast here is just staggering. Think back to Eden. After the first covenant was broken, the sign was a flaming sword, right? A symbol of judgment, of separation, a big keep out sign. But the sign for this new covenant with Noah? It's the rainbow, a universal symbol of peace, of grace, of a promise that a world-destroying flood will never happen again. It's an incredible shift from judgment to grace. All right, and that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. And I'll be honest, it's a strange and kind of difficult part of the story. It involves Noah getting drunk, the different reactions of his sons, and then this very intense, poetic prophecy that Noah delivers when he wakes up. The language here is wow, it is stark, and sadly it has been tragically twisted over the centuries. You've got this curse on Canaan, who was the son of Ham, but, and this is key, pay very close attention to that second part, blessed be Jehovah, God of Shem, because according to Terry, that's where the secret meaning is hidden.
So the idea here is that this isn't just about some family squabble. Terry reads this whole thing as a messianic oracle. The blessing on Shem is basically a prophecy pointing to a specific lineage that God will work through. And if you follow the story of the Old Testament, that's exactly what happens. The line goes from Shem to Abraham to Israel. The prophecy is that God's ultimate plan for salvation, his way of dwelling with humanity, would unfold through this one specific family line.
So let's just pull all this together. What have we learned about looking at the flood as an apocalypse? First, the whole story is a divine revelation, meant to show us something deeper. Second, its purpose is to reveal truths about judgment, salvation, and God's promises. Third, those things that look like contradictions are actually layered revelations, adding more and more detail to the story. And finally, the whole event sets up this powerful pattern you see again and again. A corrupt age ends, and a hopeful new one begins.
And that leaves us with this one last really fascinating question to think about. If we start reading other ancient foundational stories this way, not just as history books, but as apocalypses, as divine revelations, what other amazing truths might we uncover? And what patterns might we start to see for our own lives, right here and now?